The rain fell in thin, silvery sheets over Greyminster Court, the secluded estate of retired Judge Alistair Harwood, a man both feared and revered. At exactly midnight, a single gunshot tore through the quiet, echoing across the manor grounds like a final verdict. By dawn, Judge Harwood was found dead inside his locked study, a cryptic legal document clenched tightly in his hand. As the police fumbled for answers, the atmosphere thickened with whispers of betrayal, secret trials, and a judgment long overdue. Chapter 1. The Midnight Verdict. The rain began just after dusk, thin crystal threads slipping from a sky smothered in charcoal clouds. Greyminster Court, a sprawling stone maze of turrets and shadowed archways, stood like a brooding sentinel at the crest of the moor. Its windows flickered faintly with yellow lamplight, each one half hidden behind heavy velvet curtains, as though the house itself wished to shut out the world. Inside, the corridors were cold, the fireplaces barely awake, and the silence oppressive enough to make even the servants whisper. Judge Alistair Harwood disliked noise, he disliked interruptions, and more than anything, he disliked being reminded that he no longer ruled the courtroom. At precisely 11:52, he climbed the final stair toward his study, a brass-handled lantern swinging gently from his right hand. His left hand trembled, not from age, for he was only 63, but from agitation. A tension lived inside him, the kind that gnaws quietly like a hidden worm in an apple. He paused at the landing, listening. The manor breathed around him, a creaking beam, a whisper of wind against old glass, the soft thrum of distant rain. But beneath that, the judge felt something else. Felt it rather than heard it. A presence. A weight in the air. He stood for a moment, drawing a slow breath through his nose. Then he walked into his study. The room was cavernous, wrapped in dark mahogany shelves filled with law volumes worn from decades of turning pages. A grand desk of polished walnut sat in the center, its surface immaculate save for a single object, an envelope resting atop a folded legal document. The judge laid the lantern down and closed the door behind him with a decisive click. He crossed to the desk, broke the seal of the envelope, and pulled out a small note. Only 9 words. Your judgment is overdue. Tonight, the verdict falls. The judge's breath hitched. His eyes narrowed and his jaw tightened until it ached. He read the note again, and again. Then he took the folded legal document, opened it, and stared at the first line. His face drained of color. The room felt colder. The lantern flame fluttered violently as though reacting to his fear. At exactly 12 o'clock, the rain intensified, drumming sharply against the windows. At 12:01, a single gunshot shattered the night. The sound tore through Greyminster Court, echoing down its stone halls like the final pronouncement of a trial. Servants gasped awake in their quarters. A maid dropped her candle, letting it sputter out on the rug. Somewhere in the west wing, a dog howled, a raw, mournful cry. But no one moved toward the source of the sound. Not immediately. It was Greyminster Court, after all. Strange noises were not unprecedented, and Judge Harwood had been known to fire warning shots, especially when drunk. It would be nearly 10 minutes before the first footfalls approached his study door. When the morning came, the world awoke under a quiet gray light. Mist lay in coils across the courtyard like ghosts reluctant to ascend, and the rain had slowed to a thin drizzle that tapped gently on the manor roofs. At 8:17, a motor car rolled through the wrought iron gates. The driver, a young constable, shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the vehicle approached the imposing manor. Beside him sat a small, impeccably dressed man with a luxuriant mustache so meticulously curled that it seemed immune even to the damp morning air. His coat was spotless, his gloves immaculate, and his expression both curious and faintly disapproving. Hercule Poirot surveyed the manor grounds with a measured eye, So, he murmured, folding his gloved hands over his lap, Judge Harwood invites Hercule Poirot to his estate, and when Poirot arrives, eh bien, the judge is dead. A most unfortunate coincidence. Unfortunate's one way to put it, sir, the constable replied, though I'd say suspicious fits better. Poirot gave a small nod. But naturally, they reached the steps of the manor where Chief Inspector Dalloway waited, red-cheeked, thick-mustached, and troubled. Harwood's death had spread through the local police like wildfire, and Dalloway had been the one to send the urgent telegram. Poirot, he said, shaking his head, I suggested you months ago, but Harwood insisted he didn't need your help. Now look at us. Dead men are notoriously poor clients, Poirot said dryly. Dalloway grunted. They were ushered into the entrance hall, a vast chamber with a vaulted ceiling and a sweeping staircase. Paintings of grim-faced Harwood ancestors lined the walls. Generals, judges, and one particularly severe-looking great-aunt rumored to have poisoned her husband with a rare tea leaf. Poirot removed his hat, studying the space with a faint tilt of his head. Tell me, he said, who discovered the body? The butler, Mr. Fenwick, Dalloway said. But he waited a good 10 minutes before calling for help. Claims he was startled and thought it was something falling. Poirot raised a brow. A gunshot mistaken for a falling object? Curious. Very, Dalloway agreed. They walked up the staircase, each step creaking underfoot. The closer they got to the study, the colder the corridor felt, as though the house remembered the night before. A cluster of servants stood nearby, pale and tense. Poirot took note of their faces, their glances, their subtle stiffness. Fear mixed with something else, something like guilt, or perhaps anticipation. Dalloway pushed open the study door. Inside, the room was still and cold. Judge Harwood lay slumped over his desk, right cheek pressed against the wood, his eyes half open in a glassy stare. A revolver rested on the floor near his outstretched hand, and in his other hand, clutched so tightly the knuckles had turned white, was a folded legal document. Poirot approached slowly, almost gently, like a man entering a church. The scene, he murmured, speaks with many voices. He examined the body without touching it. The shot had entered near the right temple. Powder burns were faint, too faint for a close-range suicide. The position of the revolver was unnatural. The body was angled oddly, as though turned after death. Poirot's mustache bristled. This, he said softly, is no suicide. Dalloway exhaled sharply, almost relieved. Thank God you said it. Poirot glanced around. No forced entry, all windows locked from within. The door was bolted last night, yes? Fenwick claims so. Claims, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. His gaze drifted to a small brass lantern on the desk, the one the judge had carried. The wick was burned nearly to its end. Poirot touched the lantern's base, still slightly warm. He moved to the envelope Harwood had opened. It contained a short note handwritten in a strong, almost theatrical script. He read it aloud. Your judgment is overdue. Tonight, the verdict falls. Dalloway's face darkened. Threatening, but vague. Threatening, Poirot replied, and intentional. His eyes fell to the document Harwood held tightly in death. Carefully, ever so carefully, Poirot loosened the judge's fingers. The paper unfolded. Poirot scanned the header. His eyes flickered. Well, he breathed, this is unexpected. Before he could finish reading, the door creaked. A woman stepped in. A striking figure with raven-black hair pinned elegantly at the back of her head. She wore a dark green dress and held a silk handkerchief in a trembling hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. Chief Inspector, you said I might see him. Dalloway lowered his voice. Lady Vivian Harwood, his wife. Poirot studied her face. Not a single tear, but her hands shook. "Madame," Poirot said softly, "you have suffered a loss most terrible. You have my deepest sympathies." She nodded stiffly, gaze flicking to her husband's body. Her throat tightened, but again no tears came. "Vivian," Dalloway said, "where were you at midnight?" She blinked, slowly. "Asleep," she said. "In my room." "And did you hear the gunshot?" "Yes." She hesitated. But the judge often fired shots when he was angry. The servants know this." Poirot stepped closer, voice gentle. "Madame, forgive me. But last night, what angered him?" She trembled more visibly now. "I don't know." Poirot watched her carefully. She was lying, not about everything, but about something crucial. Before he could question her further, another figure strode into the study. Tall, immaculate suit, cold blue eyes. "Inspector," he said with cool authority, "why have I not been questioned? I am Judge Harwood's son, Jonathan Harwood, and I would appreciate being treated with the respect my position demands." Poirot examined him. Arrogance radiated like heat. "You are the son," Poirot said. "And where were you, monsieur, at midnight?" Jonathan didn't flinch. "In the billiard room, alone." Poirot regarded him silently for a long moment. Jonathan Harwood, calm, confident, but too controlled. A man who knew how to hide his true feelings. Poirot turned back toward the desk, his eyes sweeping every inch. Blood-stained patterns. A faint scuff mark on the floor. A tipped ink bottle. And on the judge's left sleeve, small fibers, dark blue, not matching his robe. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Someone had been close. Very close. He knelt slowly, examining the revolver. His fingers hovered above the floor. Then he spotted what he was searching for. A faint line of dust brushed aside in a half circle, as though the gun had been placed there. Not dropped. He stood. "This," Poirot said, "is a staged scene." Dalloway looked grim. "Then who staged it?" Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "For now," he said, "everyone in the house is a suspect." He turned toward the door. "But before we go further, we must understand what secret the judge sought to hide." He held up the partially opened legal document. "And why this," he tapped the heading, "was the last thing he read alive." Vivian gasped softly. Jonathan stiffened. Dalloway frowned, confused. Poirot gave a small, knowing smile. "Ah," he said, "already the truth begins to twitch beneath the soil. Let us see what grows from it." He turned the document fully. Lady Vivian's eyes widened in horror. Jonathan's jaw clenched. Even Dalloway cursed quietly. Poirot read aloud, "Confidential. Transcript of the secret trial of 1914. Presiding Judge, Alistair Harwood. Accused." The name was smeared, deliberately. Poirot looked up. "Monsieur Dalloway," he said quietly, "we are digging not into a simple murder, but into a judgment the judge intended to bury forever." He closed the document slowly, thoughtfully. "And now, messieurs et mesdames," Poirot looked at each person present, "we begin our investigation." He gave a final glance at the body. "But the killer, he or she, has already begun theirs." The rain resumed outside, soft at first, then heavier, as though the heavens themselves insisted on washing Greyminster Court clean. But nothing, Poirot knew, could wash away the secrets buried within these walls. Not yet, not until he uncovered the judge's final verdict. Chapter 2. Shadows in Greyminster Court. Greyminster Court felt different after the body was removed. Not lighter, not calmer, but listening. As Hercule Poirot stepped out of the judge's study, the corridor seemed to stiffen. The portraits glared down from the walls, stern ancestors scrutinizing him, weighing his worth. perhaps deciding whether he deserved to know their family's secrets. Footsteps echoed faintly behind him. Poirot turned. Mr. Fenwick, the butler, stood stiffly at the end of the hall. A thin man with a narrow face and eyes that never quite revealed what they were thinking. His gray suit was immaculate, as though he had ironed it even in the early hours of the morning. "Monsieur Fenwick," Poirot called gently. "You discovered the judge's body, I believe?" The butler walked forward with an expression carved from stone. "Yes, Mr. Poirot." "And you waited 10 minutes before summoning assistance?" Fenwick's composure stiffened further, like a man tightening his own necktie. "I was taken aback, sir." "Ah," Poirot said softly, "but you do not seem a man easily startled." Fenwick hesitated just for a moment, but Poirot caught it. "I apologize if it appears inconsistent," the butler said. "However, the judge often had volatile moods. My first thought was that he had simply lost his temper." "And what," Poirot asked, "usually provoked such tempers?" Fenwick's lips tightened. "His past, Mr. Poirot, the judge had regrets." Poirot's brows rose slightly. "And enemies?" Fenwick lowered his gaze. "More than a few." Before Poirot could press further, Jonathan Harwood stormed down the hallway, expression sharp as a blade. "Fenwick," Jonathan snapped, "stop loitering. If the inspector needs anything from you, he will call for you." Fenwick gave a stiff bow and retreated silently. Poirot watched the exchange, thoughtfully tapping a finger to his mustache. "You do not like the man, Monsieur Harwood?" Poirot asked mildly. Jonathan scoffed. "He meddles. He listens. He reports everything to my father, always has. He was loyal, yes, but overly so." "Too loyal," Poirot murmured. "An interesting complaint." Jonathan crossed his arms. "I hope you're not suggesting Fenwick." Poirot raised a hand. "I suggest nothing. I merely observe." Jonathan exhaled sharply. "If you need me, I'll be in Father's private library. There are papers I must review." As he left, his polished shoes clicked briskly against the marble floor. Poirot turned toward the opposite wing, where Lady Vivian had gone moments earlier. He found her at the end of a long hallway near a large arched window, staring out at the rain-slicked gardens. Her reflection trembled faintly in the glass. "Madame," Poirot said softly, "you appeared distressed when I read the document." Vivienne turned, her expression cool but fatigued, as though she had aged years overnight. "There are things," she said slowly, "that my husband never wished the world to see." "Secrets of the court," Poirot said. "Or secrets of the man?" She looked down at her hands, smoothing the silk handkerchief. "Both." Poirot stepped closer. "Madame, your husband kept records of a secret trial, one not listed in any public registry. Do you know anything of this?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You lie to protect yourself? Or someone else?" Vivienne's voice cracked. "You don't understand." Poirot leaned in, gentle yet firm. "I understand more than you think. A secret heavy enough to kill a man is a secret that endangers many." She turned away, staring out the window again. "Alistair was a man of principle," she whispered. "But sometimes principles clash with personal sins." Poirot caught the tremor in her voice, and something else, fear. Before he could speak, a shout erupted from the lower floor. "Inspector! Mr. Poirot, you'd better come quickly." It was a constable. Poirot and Vivienne exchanged a sharp glance before hurrying downstairs. They reached the drawing room where Chief Inspector Dalloway stood holding a small metallic object with a handkerchief. "What is that?" Poirot asked. Dalloway turned the object slightly so the light caught it. "A cufflink," he said. "Found on the rug beneath the study window. Someone dropped it last night." Poirot took a closer look. The cufflink was silver, engraved with initials, J.H. Poirot's eyes glinted with recognition. "Jonathan Harwood," he said quietly. Dalloway nodded grimly. "That's what I thought." Poirot folded his arms behind his back. "But let us not be too quick," he said. "J.H. could also refer to another individual, n'est-ce pas? Someone whose name we have not yet discussed." Dalloway frowned. "And who is that?" Poirot's gaze drifted to the main corridor, toward a door half hidden behind a velvet drape. "The judge," Poirot said quietly, "had an estranged brother, a man he never spoke of." Dalloway's eyebrows shot up. "I didn't know that." "Few do," Poirot replied. He approached the hidden door and pushed it open. The hinges groaned. Inside lay a small, dimly lit office, a private room lined with personal ledgers rather than law books. A sense of secrecy lingered like dust in the air. Poirot stepped in. A desk, files, stacks of correspondence, and on the desk, an open drawer with a torn photograph inside. Poirot picked it up gently. The photo showed two young men standing together outside a courthouse. One was unmistakably Judge Harwood, young, stern, ambitious. The other was a man with similar features but a wilder grin. On the back of the torn photo, written in fading ink, "To my brother James. Partners until the end." Poirot studied the handwriting, the torn edges. "So," he whispered, "the judge had two J.H.'s in his life." Dalloway stared. "James Harwood, where is he now?" Poirot placed the photo on the desk. "That," he said, "is what we must discover." He turned toward the door, eyes bright with deduction. "But whether it is the son or the brother, someone with the initials J.H. was near the judge's study last night." He paused, looking at the cufflink again. "And I suspect," he said softly, "the owner of this lost more than just an accessory." Chapter 3. The Judge's Hidden Dossier. The room smelled of old parchment, dried ink, and something sharper, like a whisper of secrets long kept in darkness. Poirot stood still for several moments, simply absorbing the atmosphere. Greyminster Court hid many things, but this little chamber felt different. Personal, untouched by the judge's public persona, as though it were the one room where he had allowed himself to be human. Chief Inspector Dalloway scanned the shelves with disbelief. "All these years," he muttered, "and no one knew this room existed?" Poirot ran a finger delicately along a stack of aged folders. "Oh, someone knew, Inspector, but they chose very carefully never to speak of it." Jonathan Harwood entered abruptly, eyes sharp. "What is going on? That room was private." Poirot turned his head slightly. "Your father's privacy, monsieur, was admirable, but he no longer requires it." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "And you think rummaging through his personal belongings will solve anything?" Poirot held up a hand. "I do not rummage, I examine." He removed a thick dossier from the shelf. Its spine cracked as though it had been opened and closed countless times. A small brass plaque read, "Case Archive, Confidential Trials." Jonathan froze. "What are those?" Poirot studied his face. "You do not know?" "No." The answer was immediate, firm. Poirot opened the file. Inside were dozens of envelopes, each marked with a date and a name, cases the judge had presided over privately, away from public record. He selected one labeled 1914, the same year referenced in the document found in Harwood's hand. "Inspector," Poirot said, "this is what the judge was reviewing before his death." Dalloway whistled softly. "Why keep these in a hidden room?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Because, Inspector, if the public knew what occurred in these trials, many reputations might be destroyed, including perhaps the judge's own." Jonathan bristled. "My father was a man of honor." "And yet," Poirot murmured, "honor is often a mask worn by men with something to hide." He retrieved a second envelope from the same dossier. No name, only a symbol, 3 vertical lines intersected by a single diagonal stroke, a mark of secrecy. Poirot opened it carefully. Poirot set the letter aside for the moment and focused on the witness statement. The handwriting trembled across the page. He was innocent. The judge knew it. But the verdict was already written. I cannot carry this alone. The signature ended abruptly, faded with age. Dalloway scratched his head. What does this mean? Poirot tapped the page. It means, Inspector, that the judge once sentenced a man he believed innocent. Jonathan inhaled sharply. That's impossible. Poirot shook his head. Non, monsieur, it is human. Too human. He placed the statement down and picked up the torn ledger page. It listed several names, many scratched out or smudged. But one name remained visible, though incomplete. James Poirot's brows rose. James Harwood, he whispered, the judge's brother. Jonathan stiffened so violently he nearly stepped back. My uncle had nothing to do with father's cases. He disappeared years ago. Poirot's mustache twitched with curiosity. Disappeared, monsieur, or was removed? Jonathan said nothing. Poirot picked up the sealed letter. Dalloway leaned over. Should we open it? Poirot considered a moment, running his thumb along the edge. Oui. He broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet, short, carefully written. Poirot read aloud. If this letter is opened, it means the past has returned. There was another trial, one no ledger records. If anyone seeks the truth, they must find the missing testimony. It was hidden for his protection. Signed, H. Jonathan's voice was hoarse. My father wrote that? Poirot nodded. And it tells us 3 things. He raised a finger. 1. The judge feared the return of something or someone from that secret trial. A second finger. 2. He hid evidence that could destroy reputations, perhaps even lives. A third finger. And 3. He believed someone was looking for that hidden testimony. Dalloway glanced at the torn photograph. James Harwood. Possibly, Poirot said. Or perhaps another, someone who was at the trial, someone still alive, someone who would kill to ensure that testimony never sees the light. He closed the letter, but there is more. He returned to the dossier and removed a small notebook wedged between 2 files. Its leather cover was cracked, its spine loose. A diary. Poirot opened it. The first entry was dated April 1914. The case is heavier than I imagined. James insists the accused is innocent. Yet the evidence, it aligns too perfectly, too cleanly. I begin to suspect I am being manipulated. Poirot flipped to the next page. Threats, anonymous letters, pressure from above. They want a judgment, not the truth. Another page. James begged me today, said I must not condemn the man, but I fear I already have. Poirot stopped. A final entry. Tonight I deliver the verdict. May God forgive me if I am wrong. The page after that was torn out. Jonathan's voice was barely audible. Who was the man, the accused? Poirot shook his head slowly. That is the question. He closed the diary with a soft, ominous thud. And it is the question our murderer seeks to bury. He placed the items back into the dossier. Inspector, Poirot said, we must secure this room, every document, every file. Someone searched here recently. I can see dust disturbed, a drawer slightly moved. Dalloway's eyes flew wide. You mean someone else found this room? Poirot nodded. Perhaps more than once. A chill swept through the chamber as if the very walls felt the weight of his words. Poirot stepped toward the doorway, pausing for a brief moment. Greyminster Court, he said quietly, is drowning in secrets. The judge tried to hold them back, but last night someone forced them to the surface. He looked back at Jonathan and Dalloway. And that person, he added softly, may still be watching us. He closed the door of the hidden chamber. But the truth, mes amis, Poirot tapped the dossier gently with a fingertip, is somewhere in these pages, and it is a truth soaked in guilt, fear, betrayal. His voice dropped to a whisper. And blood. The corridor beyond the room was dark, the shadows stretching long across the floor as though reaching for Poirot's polished shoes. He straightened his tie, his eyes gleaming with determination. Come, he said. We have only begun. Chapter 4. The Butler's Secret. A heavy silence pressed over the estate as Miss Marple stepped back inside, shaking the last drops of melted snow from her knitted shawl. The hall was dim now, lit only by the flicker of the tall iron fireplace. Shadows wavered up the walls like long, thin fingers. She paused there, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Someone was watching her. She didn't turn. She merely waited. A soft cough came from the left hallway. The butler, Ramsay, stepped into the glow of the firelight. His white gloves were immaculate as always, his face composed, but his eyes, they revealed something else, a kind of strain, a pressure. Miss Marple, he said, bowing lightly, I was just coming to find you. The inspector is becoming impatient. Inspector Harrow seems to excel at impatience, she replied pleasantly. But I imagine you didn't come to me only to deliver that message, did you, Mr. Ramsay? His jaw tightened. Only for a moment, but she noticed. Perhaps, he murmured, glancing briefly toward the grand staircase, as if to check whether someone, anyone, was listening. Perhaps there is something I should tell you. Miss Marple smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile she used for frightened people who didn't yet know the safest way to speak. Then let us walk, she suggested. Standing still can make secrets feel heavy. They began down the corridor, footsteps quiet on the long Persian carpet. Ramsay's shoulders stiffened and relaxed in uneven waves like a man arguing with his own conscience. I have served the Winthorpe family for 34 years, he began quietly. I have seen feuds, affairs, scandals, and the sort of quiet bitterness that only old money creates. But Mr. Winthorpe, he was not like the others. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted. Go on. He was troubled this past week, Ramsay said, lowering his voice to a near whisper. He received letters, anonymous ones. Threatening? I believe so, the butler said. He burned them, but not quickly enough. I saw the first line of one as he threw it into the fire. And what did it say? Ramsay swallowed. It said, I know what you did on Birch Hill. Miss Marple slowed her steps. Birch Hill. A cold, lonely place overlooking the marshes, a place where the wind always seemed to howl even on quiet days. And what exactly did Mr. Winthorpe do there? She asked gently. Ramsay hesitated. I do not know for certain, but I suspect it had something to do with Master Edwin. The son, Miss Marple murmured. Ah, yes, the one no one talks about. Ramsay's face tightened. He died 15 years ago, tragic accident, hunting. His voice lowered even more. But many in this house do not believe it was an accident. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with sudden clarity. And do you believe the accident was manufactured? Ramsay paused near a tall, curtained window. Snow tapped faintly against the old glass as if trying to listen. I believe, he said slowly, that this family has carried the guilt of Birch Hill for a very long time. And guilt, Miss Marple, has a way of finding its own voice, even after years of silence. Did Mr. Winthorpe speak of this before he died? She asked. Not directly. But 2 nights ago he asked me to lock the west wing door, the wing where Master Edwin kept his belongings as a boy. Did you lock it? Yes. His mouth tightened. But this morning when I checked it after the commotion, it was open. Open? Her tone sharpened. Ramsay nodded. Someone entered that wing last night, either before or after the murder. Miss Marple's thoughts stirred rapidly. Secrets hidden for 15 years, a dead son, anonymous threats, a locked wing forced open, and now a patriarch murdered in the snow. "Did Mr. Winthrop argue with anyone last night?" she asked. "Before his death?" Ramsay's voice shifted, strange, cold. "He had a visitor." Miss Marple stopped walking entirely. "A visitor? Who?" Ramsay took a long breath. "His daughter, Miss Claudia. The elegant, sharp-tongued woman in the satin dress. The one who had seemed strangely calm when the body was found. The one who had watched the snow as though expecting it to bury something more than footprints. She arrived unexpectedly," the butler said. "Late in the night. I heard shouting from the study, accusations, something about Edwin. And about inheritance." Miss Marple's eyes thinned. "And she left the study before or after Mr. Winthrop went out to the garden. After, I believe. I heard the front door open only once before the body was found." "And where was Miss Claudia during that time?" A long silence. "She did not allow me to see," Ramsay admitted. "She told me she needed privacy." Miss Marple resumed walking, her mind assembling pieces. Not into a full picture yet, but into a frame. When they reached the next hallway, Inspector Harrow stepped forward from the shadows. His expression said everything. He had been listening. "Interesting," he remarked, his voice low and heavy with suspicion. "Very interesting indeed." Ramsay stiffened immediately, almost stepping back like a soldier caught breaking formation. "Inspector?" Miss Marple greeted politely. "Eavesdropping does not become you." "Neither does being deceived," Harrow shot back. "The daughter, Claudia, argued with her father on the night of the murder, and now we hear about some mysterious incident on Birch Hill. Secrets, threats, hidden letters." He stepped closer to Miss Marple. "You knew nothing of this?" "I suspected much of it," she replied calmly. "But suspicion without proof is gossip, Inspector, and I do not deal in gossip." Harrow exhaled hard. "Then let's deal in fact. Miss Claudia is our prime suspect." Miss Marple shook her head slightly. "No. Someone entered the West Wing last night," she reminded him. "Someone opened a locked door. Someone who wanted something from the past. Something connected to Edwin Winthrop. Miss Claudia neither knew of that lock nor cared for it." "Then who?" Harrow demanded. Miss Marple looked toward Ramsay. The butler froze. "Mr. Ramsay," she said softly, "there is something else you haven't told us." His throat bobbed. I do not—" "Oh, do stop," she interrupted, though gently. "Your fear is practically radiating. You weren't merely aware of the family secrets, you were part of them." Inspector Harrow's eyes went wide. Part of them? For a moment, Ramsay didn't answer. His hands shook, his breath trembled, and then finally, "I loved Master Edwin," he whispered, voice cracking. "He was like a son to me, and his death was not an accident. I knew that, I always knew that. But the master forbade me from speaking. He said it would ruin us all." Miss Marple's expression softened, but only for a second. "Ruin whom?" she pressed. "The family or him?" Ramsay closed his eyes. Tears slipped down the lines of his face. "I don't know anymore." Inspector Harrow stepped forward. "Ramsay, are you telling us Mr. Winthrop killed his own son?" "No!" the butler cried, horrified. "Not killed, not exactly, but he covered something terrible." Miss Marple's voice lowered to a whisper. "You meant to reveal the truth last night, didn't you? That's why you opened the West Wing." Ramsay's eyes flew open, shocked. "How did you—" "You said it yourself," Miss Marple murmured. "Secrets become heavy, and a man carrying a heavy secret trembles in a very particular way. I've seen it too many times not to recognize the weight. Ramsay stared at her, defeated. I wanted to find Edwin's diary. His voice cracked again. He hid it somewhere in that wing. He wrote everything, every fear, every suspicion, every name. Miss Marple inhaled sharply. Every name. Inspector Harrow stiffened in excitement. And you think this diary reveals the murderer? Ramsay nodded weakly. I think someone else knew about it too. Someone searching for it. Someone willing to kill to keep the past buried. Silence fell like snow. Soft, cold, and deadly. Miss Marple's voice was steady, but her eyes gleamed with new understanding. Then, she said, we must find that diary before the killer does. And from somewhere deep in the house, a door creaked. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Someone else had been listening. Someone who did not want the past to resurface. Miss Marple turned toward the sound, her heart steady, her mind sharper than winter wind. The game, she whispered, is finally beginning. Chapter 5. The footsteps in the dark. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the hallway, each one tapping softly against the cold wooden floor. And Miss Marple felt the tension ripple through the walls like a shiver passing through the bones of the old estate. She exchanged a quick glance with Ramsay, whose face had drained of all color, and with Inspector Harrow, whose hand instinctively hovered near the inside pocket of his coat where he kept a small revolver he rarely used but always carried. The footsteps paused at the end of the corridor, then continued with a measured rhythm, almost as if the person walking wanted them to know they were being approached, wanted them to hear, wanted them to wait. Miss Marple took a careful step forward, her eyes narrowing as the dim light of the sconces flickered, their flames dancing as though stirred by an unseen breath. She moved toward the corner, her heart perfectly calm, her mind slicing through the shadows with the precision of a needle. The footsteps stopped. A moment of quiet hung in the air like a suspended icicle waiting to fall. Then the tall, slender figure of Miss Claudia Winthorpe stepped into view, her expression sharpened with an irritation that almost managed to hide the subtle tremor in her fingers. What exactly, she demanded, her voice sharp, is happening in this house? Inspector Harrow stepped forward, his tone clipped and official as he accused her of arriving mysteriously, arguing with her father, disappearing at the time of the murder, but Miss Claudia only laughed, a cold, brittle sound that scraped the walls. Is that what Ramsay told you? She snapped, her gaze slicing toward the butler. Because if we're discussing secrets, perhaps the good inspector should know Ramsay spent 15 years protecting my father from a truth he refused to face. Ramsay's lips tightened as he whispered a shaky protest, but Miss Claudia continued talking, her voice dropping into an icy calm. My father ruined Edwin, she said. He pushed him too hard, pressured him, controlled him. He couldn't bear it. Edwin broke under the weight, and father locked the entire incident behind money and silence. Miss Marple listened intently, noting every flicker of grief in Claudia's voice, every shadow that crossed Ramsay's eyes, every twitch in Inspector Harrow's jaw. But she sensed something else. This woman was not trying to hide guilt. She was trying to release long-held fury. That night, Claudia continued, I came because father called me. He said he had something to confess, something that would change everything about Edwin's death. Miss Marple's mind clicked. He received letters, she said softly, threatening ones. Claudia nodded, and he thought the sender was someone inside the family, or inside this house. The hallway grew colder, as if the walls absorbed the words. Inspector Harrow asked where she was during the time of the murder, and Claudia admitted she had gone to the West Wing. searching for Edwin's diary herself, but found the door open already. She turned to Ramsay with narrowed eyes. "He beat me to it. I heard him inside. I didn't go in. I left before he saw me." Ramsay, trembling, confirmed it with a shaky nod. "I was searching for that diary," he whispered, "because I knew the truth in it could destroy someone here. Someone dangerous." Miss Marple felt the pieces pulling tighter. Whoever killed Mr. Winthorpe wasn't just threatened by the man himself. They feared something Edwin had written long ago. Inspector Harrow's frustration hardened into urgency. They needed that diary and needed it now. Miss Marple instructed Ramsay to show them the West Wing immediately. But as they turned, a faint metallic clink drifted from somewhere deeper in the house, like the soft slide of a lock or the quick movement of a drawer. Someone was moving. Someone who knew they were close. The group moved quietly through the dark corridor, the air turning colder the nearer they came to the West Wing. The old wooden beams above creaked as though the estate itself were listening. As they reached the tall double doors, Ramsay hesitated. His hand trembled as he unlocked them. The doors swung inward with a low groan, revealing a long hallway coated in dust, lined with old portraits of Edwin at various ages. Smiling as a boy, proud as a young man, always with eyes that held a quiet loneliness. Miss Claudia's breath caught at the sight, her anger flickering into grief. They stepped inside, the air stale and untouched for years. Miss Marple immediately sensed disturbance. Footprints in the dust, faint drag marks on the floor near the far room, and a single candle stub still warm on a small wooden table. "Someone was here less than an hour ago," she murmured. They moved deeper until they reached Edwin's old study. The door was ajar. Inside, papers lay scattered, drawers thrown open, and a small wooden box sat cracked on the floor. Ramsay dropped to his knees beside it. "This is where he kept it," he whispered, "the diary." But the box was empty. Miss Claudia swore under her breath. Inspector Harrow clenched his fists, and Miss Marple simply looked around the room, absorbing every detail. A window slightly open, letting a thin breeze through. A scuff mark near the desk. A faint smell of damp wool. Someone had been wet from the snow. "The murderer," she said quietly, "has the diary now." Silence followed as the weight of her words settled. "And they will kill again to keep its contents buried." As she spoke, she noticed a small scrap of torn paper trapped between two floorboards. She knelt, pried it free, and read the single line scribbled in trembling handwriting. "He knows what happened that night, and he will tell." Miss Marple's blood chilled. This was written by Edwin. And the sentence didn't end in a name, because the name had been torn away, deliberately. Behind them, a soft sound, like a floorboard being pressed, made all three turn sharply. A shadow slipped past the doorway. Someone had been listening. Someone who now knew they were close. Miss Marple rose, eyes sharp as glass. "Inspector," she murmured, "lock every door. No one leaves this wing." But as Harrow reached for the door, it slammed shut from the outside with such force the walls rattled. And a voice, low, controlled, dangerous, echoed through the West Wing corridor. "You should not have come here." Miss Marple's heartbeat remained steady. Her eyes glimmered like cold winter steel. The hunt had truly begun. Chapter 6. The Diary of the Dead. The West Wing fell into a suffocating silence after the door slammed shut, the echo lingering in the air like a warning bell. And for a moment no one moved, as though the house itself were holding its breath and waiting to see what Miss Marple would do. Inspector Harrow lunged at the door and yanked the handle, only to find it locked from the outside, his frustration boiling over as he swore under his breath, while Miss Claudia stepped backward, her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with fear she could barely disguise. And Miss Marple simply stood in the center of the dim, dust-veiled study, her sharp gaze cutting through the darkness as she whispered, Whoever is out there knows we've uncovered too much." A faint shuffle echoed down the corridor, soft but unmistakable, and Ramsay flinched, clutching the edge of the desk to steady himself. Miss Marple motioned for silence, her mind racing as she pieced together the clues scattered across the room. The torn scrap with Edwin's final words, the empty box that once held the diary, the lingering scent of damp wool from someone who had braved the snowfall outside, and the faint smear of mud near the window that suggested a hasty escape route. She moved toward the window with slow, deliberate steps, her shoes whispering against the old wooden boards, and examined the latch. It was unlocked, left that way intentionally, though the window was only opened by an inch, just enough for someone to slide in a hand and push it further without making noise. "He was here," she murmured, "just minutes before us." Inspector Harrow spun from the door, his voice sharp. Who? Who keeps getting ahead of us?" But Miss Marple did not answer immediately. Instead, she touched the mud streak with the tip of her gloved finger, lifting a faint trace to the light, darker soil mixed with grit, not from the front garden or the nearby river path. It was soil from the old stables behind the house. Her mind clicked. "Our intruder came through the stable path," she said softly, "which means he knew the estate well." "Too well," Claudia swallowed hard. "Are you saying it's someone in this house?" Miss Marple did not reply, but her silence spoke for her. She turned back to the desk, her eyes catching on a single drawer that remained tightly shut while the others had been ransacked. Without hesitation, she pulled it open. Inside lay a thin envelope yellowed with age, sealed but brittle around the edges and marked with Edwin's handwriting. "For the one who sees the truth." Miss Claudia gasped, her hand trembling as she reached forward, but Miss Marple gently stopped her. "Let us be careful," she said, studying the envelope for signs of tampering. Nothing. Whoever had stolen the diary had not seen this. She slid a letter opener under the seal and lifted the flap. Inside were 3 items: a short note written by Edwin, a folded newspaper clipping, and a small, torn half of a photograph. Miss Marple began reading the note aloud, her voice steady. "If Father ever seeks to reveal what happened that night, he must also reveal what he hid to protect the one he loved. I fear the truth will not set us free, it will destroy us. But someone must know. Someone must carry it. I write this for the one who will understand." Inspector Harrow frowned. "What truth?" Miss Marple unfolded the newspaper clipping. It was from 16 years ago. An article reporting the death of a young woman named Eliza Morecambe, a governess employed at the estate, found drowned in the river that bordered the property. The article claimed drowning by accident, but someone had circled the phrase "no signs of struggle," pressing so hard that the ink tore through the paper. Claudia sank onto a chair, the color draining from her face. "I remember her. Edwin adored her. She choked. "She was the only person who made him happy." Ramsay bowed his head. "And Mr. Winthorpe forbade the relationship." Miss Marple nodded quietly. "A forbidden love, a mysterious death, a family trying to bury a scandal." She lifted the torn photograph. It showed Edwin standing beside a young woman whose face was missing. The torn half had removed it. But Eliza's hand was still visible, resting on Edwin's arm with unmistakable intimacy. Inspector Harrow's jaw tightened. So Edwin was in love with the governess, and she ended up dead, and the father covered it up. "Not only covered it up," Miss Marple murmured, "but lied about it, and someone else knew the truth." She tapped the torn edge of the photograph. "Someone tore her face away deliberately, someone who hated her." Before she could continue, a metallic scrape echoed from outside the room like a blade brushing against stone. All four froze. Slowly, carefully, Miss Marple moved toward the door, lowering her voice to a whisper. "He hasn't left. He's watching to see what we discover." Inspector Harrow pressed his ear against the wood. Nothing. Just silence. But Miss Marple knew better. She stepped away and turned toward the fireplace. It was cold, unused for years. But something glinted behind the grate. She knelt and reached inside, retrieving a small key coated in dust and ash. Claudia gasped. That key! Father kept the West Wing locked for over a decade. That must be the key to Edwin's chest, Miss Marple whispered. The real chest, not the wooden box someone emptied. Her heart quickened slightly. If the diary was gone, perhaps Edwin had kept something else, something more dangerous. Suddenly, Ramsay pointed to the far corner of the room, his voice barely a breath. "Look!" A long shadow appeared beneath the door, slowly moving, standing still, then shifting again, watching. Miss Claudia covered her mouth to stifle a scream. Inspector Harrow motioned for silence. Miss Marple did not move, did not panic. She simply lifted the key in her hand and spoke clearly, her voice calm but carrying across the wing. "You already have the diary," she said to the unseen figure. "You know what Edwin wrote, but you fear what he hid." The shadow froze. "You fear," she continued, "the one truth he never put in writing." The shadow vanished. Footsteps fled down the corridor. Inspector Harrow lunged for the door again, but Miss Marple raised a hand. "No. He wants to lure us out, but he made a mistake." She turned the key over, studying the faded initials carved into its handle. E.M. Eliza Morecombe. "The chest," Miss Marple whispered, eyes gleaming, "is still here, hidden. And inside it lies the secret that drove a father to silence, a son to despair, and a killer to murder." She rose, her voice low, calm, resolute. "Find the chest, Inspector, and we find the killer." Chapter 7. The chest beneath the floorboards. The West Wing seemed to breathe as Miss Marple, Inspector Harrow, Claudia, and Ramsay stepped cautiously back into the long corridor. The air thick with the dust of a past long buried and now stirred awake. And for a moment the faint whisper of footsteps that had fled moments before still hung in the cold air like an accusation. Miss Marple moved slowly to the center of the hall, her cane tapping lightly as she listened, not to sounds but to the house itself, for old homes carried memories in their bones and Greyminster had been whispering truths all night. She paused before a faded portrait of Edwin taken when he was only 15, and her eyes softened with a kind of sorrow. She traced the outline of the painting's frame with a single gloved finger, noticing it was thicker at the base than the others, then stepped back thoughtfully. Edwin's chest, she murmured, was not hidden randomly. It would be somewhere meaningful to him, somewhere he felt safe. Claudia shuddered. His room? His study? The garden, perhaps? But Miss Marple shook her head, her gaze drifting downward to the floorboards. "No, my dear. Somewhere closer. Somewhere his father would never think to search." With a slow, deliberate motion, she lowered herself to the floor and tapped lightly on the boards. Tap, 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 listening for the hollow resonance of a hidden compartment. And Ramsay watched with widening eyes as one section near the base of the portrait echoed ever so slightly. "There," he whispered. Harrow knelt beside her and slid a knife between the boards, prying gently until the wooden plank lifted with a dry groan, revealing a shallow cavity stuffed with dust, a thin layer of cloth and a locked metal chest no larger than a shoebox, flecked with rust but unmistakably marked with the initials E.M. Claudia gasped, her breath trembling. Eliza Morecombe. He kept her things. Inspector Harrow reached for the chest, but Miss Marple stopped him with a raised hand. "Let us be precise, Inspector. Someone has already proven willing to kill for what lies inside. She examined the lock, sturdy, old, but perfectly designed for the key she held. With a soft click, the chest opened, the hinges protesting after years of stillness, and inside lay 3 objects. A stack of letters bound with a faded ribbon, a slender notebook wrapped in linen, and a small silver locket. Claudia's hand flew to her mouth, her voice breaking. That was hers. I remember she wore it always. Miss Marple lifted the locket first. Inside was a miniature sketch, not a photograph, of Edwin and Eliza together, smiling in a way neither had ever done in their portraits. They were in love, Miss Marple whispered. Properly, deeply, dangerously so. No wonder the family buried her memory. Inspector Harrow unfolded the letters next, scanning through pages filled with tenderness, longing, and a plan to escape the estate together once Edwin turned 21 and was free of his father's control. But the last letter written by Eliza took a darker tone, trembling words speaking of threats, of someone watching her, of someone warning her to leave Edwin forever or face consequences she refused to imagine. Harrow exhaled sharply. This was never an accident. She was silenced. Claudia sank onto the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. Father lied to us all. To me. To Edwin. He told me she fell. He told me. Her voice faltered. Ramsay placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Your father feared scandal more than truth. But Miss Marple was already opening the final item. The linen-wrapped notebook, small, bound with string and stained with age. Edwin's journal, but not the one taken. This was older, written before Eliza's death. The entries began with hopeful notes about their secret meetings, poems he wrote her, dreams of freedom. But halfway through, the tone shifted abruptly, the handwriting jagged with anxiety. Someone knows, one page read. Someone warned her. Someone threatened her. She is frightened for me, but I fear only for her. Miss Marple read silently as the entries spiraled into dread. Edwin documented a figure he kept seeing near the garden, tall, broad-shouldered, always lurking at dusk, a voice whispering through the walls at night, a warning scratched onto his window pane. Stay away from her. Then 2 days before Eliza's death, Edwin wrote one final paragraph. I know who it is, someone close, someone who hates that I have found joy. Father will never believe me. Eliza says we must leave tonight. But if anything happens, let this stand as the truth. I loved her, and someone chose to destroy that. Miss Claudia sobbed openly now, leaning against the wall as Miss Marple closed the notebook gently and placed it back inside the chest. This is it, Harrow said quietly. Everything we need, every motive, every lie. Not everything, Miss Marple corrected softly. We still do not know who killed Eliza, nor who killed your father. She rose slowly, her eyes sharpening like a blade catching light. But we know why. As she stepped back, the floorboards creaked behind them, not from their weight, but from someone else standing at the far end of the corridor. A shadow stretched toward them. A soft breath escaped Claudia. Ramsay's lips trembled. Harrow reached slowly for his revolver, and the voice that drifted through the dim corridor made the candles flicker faintly. Close the chest, the voice said calmly, and walk away. Miss Marple frowned. You've been listening. I've been waiting, the voice replied, stepping forward into the faint glow. A tall figure, coat dusted with snow, hair damp, eyes cold with determination. You were never meant to find that chest. Harrow raised the revolver. Stay where you are. But the figure only smiled. You still don't understand, Inspector. None of you do. The light fell. Across his face, then, enough for Miss Marple to see it clearly. She inhaled softly, the pieces clicking into place like a lock turning. Of course, she whispered. It was always going to be you. Chapter 8. The shadow behind the glass. The storm outside had begun to settle into a heavy drizzle, but inside the manor a different kind of storm raged. Silent, invisible, and far more dangerous. Sherlock Holmes stood in the dim hallway of Blackthorn Manor, his silhouette long and sharp against the flickering lights as he stared at the cracked window where frost had formed an oddly perfect arc, almost as though someone's gloved hand had pressed against it moments before. The air was unnervingly still, heavy with the faint smell of wet earth and burning wood from the distant fireplace, as if the manor itself was holding its breath. Watson joined him, breathing hard after racing down from the attic, holding the torn scrap of coat fabric they had found near the shattered lantern. "Holmes," he said, voice dropping to a whisper. "Someone was up there with us." Holmes didn't turn. He lifted his chin slightly, his eyes narrowed, studying the frost pattern as though it were a coded message. "Not someone," he murmured, "but the one person who knows this house better than its owner ever could." Watson felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Holmes didn't speak lightly, and certainly not with such cold certainty. Just as Watson opened his mouth to ask what he meant, a sudden clatter echoed from the east wing, the metallic ring bouncing through the corridors like a distant alarm. Holmes moved instantly, his coat sweeping behind him. Gliding more than running, his senses sharpened like blades. Watson followed, boots pounding the wooden floors as they turned corner after corner until they reached a long glass corridor overlooking the gardens, the panes glistening with rain. At the far end, a maintenance trolley lay toppled, tools scattered across the tiles like a breadcrumb trail left by a hurried intruder. Holmes crouched beside the trolley, touching the cold metal handle. "Still warm," he muttered, more to himself than to Watson. "Our shadow isn't far." He picked up a wrench from the floor and examined the faint smear of black grease on its edge. Not from machinery, but from gloves, thick ones worn by those who wished to leave no fingerprints. The corridor felt stretched, elongated by tension, each footstep echoing like a warning. A sudden flicker of movement outside the window caught Holmes's attention, and he snapped his gaze toward the garden. A dark figure darted between hedges, barely visible through the rain. Holmes sprang to his feet, racing toward the garden door, flinging it open so violently the hinges groaned. The cold night air slammed into them, carrying the scent of wet soil and decaying leaves. The figure was already halfway across the lawn, heading toward the greenhouse, its tall glass structure glowing, faintly from within, like a lantern in the fog. "Holmes!" Watson called out, trying to keep up as his friend strode with fierce determination, his eyes burning with the thrill of the chase and the weight of understanding. Whoever they were pursuing wasn't merely running, they were leading Holmes somewhere. The thought gnawed at Watson, but Holmes didn't hesitate. He reached the greenhouse first, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. Immediately, the humid air wrapped around them like a thick blanket, fogging the glass walls. The smell of damp soil, wilted petals, and something metallic, blood, made Watson's stomach twist. Rows of exotic plants created a maze of shadows, leaves dripping water that hit the ground like soft taps of a clock. Holmes raised a lantern from a nearby hook, lighting their path. The glow revealed footprints in the soft dirt, fresh, deep, and circling around the central table. Holmes approached cautiously. On the table lay scattered documents, soaked slightly from humidity, edges curling. At the center was a small locked box, ornate brass and unmistakably old. Holmes brushed the dust from its surface, revealing a family crest, Blackthorn's crest. Watson felt his throat tighten. "Is that?" Holmes nodded. "The key to everything," he said quietly, "but not in the way one assumes." Before Watson could question him, a sound ripped through the greenhouse, a sharp crack like wood snapping. Holmes pushed Watson aside just as a shelf collapsed behind them, heavy pots crashing down exactly where Watson had been standing. Someone had triggered it deliberately. Holmes spun, scanning the rows of plants, but the intruder was already fleeing, their shadow slipping through the rear exit like smoke. Holmes surged forward, reaching the door only to find it swinging gently, the night outside pitch black. For the first time since entering the manor, Holmes allowed a flicker of frustration to show. "They are watching us," he said, voice low, anticipating every move. Watson steadied himself, brushing dirt from his coat. "But why lead us here? Why not finish us when they had the chance?" Holmes closed the greenhouse door slowly, his fingers brushing the cracked wood. "Because what they want," he said, "is not our silence, but our attention." They returned inside the manor, the brass box carefully tucked under Holmes's arm. The manor's corridors felt even colder now, the shadows thicker, as though the intruder's presence had seeped into the walls. As they reached the study, Holmes placed the box on the desk, illuminated by a single lamp, its light warm but small, fighting the vast gloom around them. Holmes examined the lock. Ancient, delicate. A lock not meant to keep thieves out, but to ensure only one person, a blackthorn, could access its contents. He paced around the desk, hands clasped behind him, mind racing. Watson waited, knowing better than to speak. Finally, Holmes looked up, his voice a cold whisper. "This box was never meant to be found. It was planted for us." Before Watson could respond, the study door creaked open slowly, though no wind blew and no footsteps approached. Both men turned sharply, hearts pounding. At the entrance stood Lady Evelyn Blackthorne, her nightgown brushing the floor, her eyes glassy as though she had awakened from a nightmare she wasn't sure had ended. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, voice trembling, "you need to see something. It was left on my door." She held out a single sheet of paper, crinkled, damp from her shaking hands. Holmes took it and held it under the lamp. A chill spread through the room. On the paper was a hand-drawn image of the manor's greenhouse, but there was more. Standing inside it were two figures, one unmistakably Holmes, the other, a dark silhouette with no face. At the bottom were 4 words written in jagged ink. "You're already too late." Watson felt his blood run cold. But Holmes did not flinch. He stared at the drawing as though staring into the intruder's eyes. "No," Holmes whispered almost to himself, "the game has only begun." Chapter 9. The Masked Truth. The storm outside had dwindled to a thin drizzle, leaving the manor enveloped in a damp, heavy silence that seemed almost alive, breathing through the old wooden beams and settling into the shadows of every hallway. And Miss Marple, Inspector Harrow, Claudia, and Ramsay moved cautiously through the dim corridors of Greyminster Court, each footstep echoing with urgency, the weight of what they had uncovered pressing down on their shoulders like a tangible force. The brass key to Edwin's chest gleamed faintly in Miss Marple's hand, and she felt the tension in the air twist tighter with every creak of the floorboards beneath their feet. For she knew that whoever had stolen the diary, whoever had orchestrated the murders and the threats, was still inside the house, watching, waiting, calculating, and perhaps even laughing quietly at their desperate pursuit of truth. They reached the grand library, its towering shelves dark and foreboding, the faint scent of mold and old ink mixing with the lingering smoke from the extinguished fireplace. And there, amid the shadows, Miss Marple paused to examine a small desk tucked in the corner, noticing a single sheet of paper pinned with a delicate silver tack. It bore a message written in hurried, slanted handwriting. "Do not trust the eyes that seem familiar. The one you seek wears a mask of loyalty but carries the dagger of betrayal." Claudia shivered, clutching Ramsay's arm while Harrow's face hardened. "A mask?" he asked, his voice taut. Miss Marple nodded slowly, eyes scanning the room. "Yes. Someone in this house pretends to serve, to protect, while hiding motives darker than we have imagined. We must watch each other carefully. At that moment, the faintest movement caught her attention. A curtain fluttering, though no window was open, a shadow stretching longer, a subtle shift in the air, and she realized they were being observed. "Quietly," she whispered, and they advanced together toward the back of the library, where a narrow staircase led to the servants' quarters, long abandoned except for Ramsay, who had maintained them for decades. As they ascended, the air grew colder, and a faint metallic scent drifted down from the upper floors. Miss Marple paused at the top, listening intently, then pressed her hand against a door that seemed unusually warm. "Someone is inside," she murmured. Harrow reached for the handle, but Miss Marple held up a finger. "No. Let us see who wishes to reveal themselves." The door creaked open slowly, revealing a small room lined with shelves of glass jars and old ledgers. And there, crouched in the shadows, was a figure they all recognized, Claudia's cousin, Leonard Winthorpe, his eyes wide with fear and guilt, hands trembling as he held a small, soaked bundle against his chest. "Leonard," Miss Marple said softly, "so you are the one behind the mask." Leonard's lips quivered. I only wanted to protect the family name. I did not kill. I only tried to hide what Father did, what Edwin suffered, what Eliza—" His voice faltered, choking on the memories. Miss Marple's gaze did not waver. "And the diary, the threats, the intrusions, who else helped you?" He shook his head violently. "No one else. I only moved the diary, I only watched, I meant to prevent more tragedy, not cause it." Claudia's voice cracked. "You endangered us. You killed Father." Leonard flinched violently. "I did not. I never. It was someone else. Someone who wanted the truth destroyed before it could ruin them. I only—" He fell silent as a soft click echoed from the far corner of the room. The group spun toward the sound, hearts pounding. There, partially hidden behind a tall bookcase, was the real intruder, the one who had orchestrated the murders, the threats, and the theft of the diary. A mask covered the figure's face, but the eyes glimmered with cold malice. "You found me at last," the intruder said, voice smooth but deadly, carrying a cruel satisfaction. Harrow took a cautious step forward. "Who are you?" The intruder laughed softly, low and chilling. "I am the keeper of secrets, the one who ensured the past remained buried. I am the one Edwin feared, the one Eliza tried to escape, the one who followed your every move tonight." Ramsay stepped protectively in front of Claudia. "Stay back!" he shouted. But Miss Marple stepped forward, her expression serene yet fierce, eyes piercing the shadows. "You are not invisible," she said calmly. "Your mask cannot hide the truth." The intruder tilted their head, voice now almost a whisper. "The truth? The truth is dead, just like the boy, just like the girl, just like your father. You cannot unearth it without risking everything." Miss Marple's hand moved slowly to the key in her pocket. "You speak of risk, yet you entered this house knowing we would pursue it. You cannot control what you fear." The intruder's laugh turned bitter. "Control is everything. Without it, chaos reigns." Holmes would have called it bravado. Miss Marple recognized it as desperation. "We do not seek control," she said. "We seek justice, and justice is patient. It waits for those clever enough to unravel deception." Leonard shivered, stepping closer. "She's right. You cannot hold this secret forever." The intruder's eyes narrowed, and with a sudden, lightning-quick motion, they lunged toward the desk, aiming for the key. But Miss Marple was faster. Her hands struck theirs with precision, and the bundle of keys and paper fell to the floor with a loud clatter, sending the mask tilting askew, revealing a familiar face, Jonathan Harwood. Harrow stepped back, stunned. Claudia gasped. Ramsey's hand flew to his mouth. Jonathan's mask had hidden him all along, the trusted cousin, the one everyone thought loyal, now exposed. "You!" Claudia screamed. "You killed Father! You moved the diary! You threatened us all!" Jonathan's voice was calm now, eerily so. "I did what was necessary. The family's name, Edwin's disgrace, the scandal of Eliza. None of it could be allowed to surface. Father was weak. Leonard was naive. And now you interfere." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "You underestimated patience and intelligence. Your mask has slipped, Jonathan, and your control ends here." He lunged again, but Harrow caught him by the arm. Ramsey grabbed his coat, and Claudia stepped forward shakily, pointing at the open chest on the desk. "The diary," she cried. "It proves everything." Miss Marple nodded. "And now the truth cannot be hidden." Jonathan's face twisted in rage. "You think this changes anything? The family will be ruined anyway." Miss Marple's voice remained steady, unshaken. "Only the guilty fear ruin. The innocent are strengthened by it." With a final defiant glare, Jonathan realized resistance was futile. Harrow held him firmly as Miss Marple carefully examined the chest, verifying its contents. Every letter, every page, every note. Edwin's journal. Eliza's letters. The scraps Jonathan had tried to hide were safe. The intruder was finally caught. The storm outside had faded completely, leaving only the soft drizzle against the windows, a reminder that even after darkness and deceit, truth could emerge, fragile yet undeniable. Miss Marple, her eyes soft but resolute, addressed the group. "The past was never truly buried. Secrets cannot remain hidden forever, and those who act out of fear or greed always leave traces. Tonight the mask is removed, and the truth stands revealed." Jonathan, now unmasked and defeated, could only glare while Leonard, Ramsey, and Claudia felt the heavy weight of decades of lies finally lift. The house seemed quieter now, not just in the absence of violence, but in the profound acknowledgement that what had been hidden, what had been feared, would finally be confronted, and the path to justice had begun. Chapter 10. The Unveiling of Truth. The morning light filtered weakly through the tall windows of Greyminster Court, painting the long corridors in a gray, almost mournful glow. Yet within the walls there was no sadness, only a taut quiet, thick with anticipation, as Miss Marple, Inspector Harrow, Claudia, and Ramsey gathered in the grand hall, the brass key in Miss Marple's hand glinting faintly, a silent reminder of all that had been uncovered and all that remained to be confronted. Jonathan Harwood, still in cuffs, sat stiffly in a high-backed chair, his eyes darting from one person to another, calculating, angry, but finally realizing that the web he had spun over decades was unraveling with precise inevitability. While Miss Marple moved slowly toward the hearth, her gaze sweeping across the room, noting every detail, every reflection, every shadow, because the truth, she knew, was never in the overt actions alone, but in the hidden movements, the subtle tremors of those who carry guilt. She addressed the group calmly, her voice even but commanding attention. "The past, long buried under fear and pretense, has now been unearthed. Every action, every silence, every choice has led us to this moment. Jonathan Harwood attempted to hide Edwin Winthorpe's truth, Eliza Morecambe's fate, and even his own ambition behind layers of deception. But deception always leaves threads, and tonight those threads have guided us to clarity." Jonathan's face flushed with fury. "Clarity?" he spat. "What clarity? You think exposing me absolves the rest? The shame, the disgrace, everything my family tried to protect. You think it ends here?" Miss Marple raised a hand, a soft gesture that quieted even Harrow. "No, Jonathan. It does not erase the consequences of your actions, but it ensures that truth stands unbroken. You cannot rewrite history, nor can you continue to manipulate the living to shield your guilt. Every lie you told, every step you took to cover the murders has left evidence, And all of it has been recovered. The diary, the chest, the letters, all in their rightful place. Claudia stepped forward, her face pale but determined. Father lied, Jonathan. He told us one story about Edwin and Eliza, but it was not the truth, and you— She gestured sharply at him. You tried to finish what he began. Jonathan's mouth opened, then closed, anger giving way to the faintest flicker of fear. Ramsay, whose face had remained stoic through the night, finally spoke, voice trembling slightly. You underestimated loyalty and patience, Jonathan. We have preserved what is right. Your attempts at concealment are over. Miss Marple turned, her gaze piercing Jonathan's, like a knife, calm but unwavering. You relied on intimidation, threats, and fear to maintain your control over what was hidden. But the diary has surfaced. The letters are here. The chest remains intact, and the witnesses, those who loved and those who suffered, stand ready to recount every truth you tried to bury. Every step you took to silence others has been documented in Edwin's journal and Eliza's letters, and now your role, your deceit is laid bare. Jonathan swallowed hard. The proud mask of arrogance slipped. So, what happens now? He asked, voice lower, wary. Justice, Miss Marple said simply. And truth. The authorities will determine the extent of your crimes, the cover-ups, the threats. But more importantly, the lives that have been distorted by your actions can begin to heal. The secrets that have haunted this house for decades no longer control the living. You do. She gestured toward Claudia and Ramsay, whose shoulders slumped slightly as relief mingled with the weight of years finally lifted. Edwin's love for Eliza, though tragic in its ending, will now be remembered truthfully. The innocence lost, the lies forced upon them will not be forgotten. And the family, though scarred, can move forward in honesty. Claudia's hand trembled as she reached for the chest. She lifted the brass lid, revealing Edwin's and Eliza's preserved letters, the journal, and the locket. A tear slipped down her cheek. At last, she whispered, we know everything. At last, it can end. Miss Marple nodded. Endings are always beginnings, Miss Claudia. The beginning of understanding, of reconciliation, and of justice. Inspector Harrow stepped forward, checking Jonathan's restraints. He will answer for his crimes. But thanks to you, Miss Marple, we have everything we need. Every motive, every lie, every act documented and ready. Jonathan's eyes darted around the room, realizing his control had evaporated. I did what I thought was necessary, he muttered. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. Necessary? To protect a lie? Necessary to murder secrecy instead of facing truth? No, Jonathan. Nothing justifies your actions. The end does not justify the means. Jonathan slumped slightly, the fight leaving him. The manor seemed to exhale, the shadows retreating from the corners, the quiet now less suffocating and more like a promise of resolution. Miss Marple turned to Claudia and Ramsay, her voice softening. It is time to leave this behind. The house will always remember, yes, but the living must remember too. Truth once discovered cannot be unlearned, but it can guide the steps forward. Ramsay's hands shook as he placed the locket into Claudia's palm. Edwin and Eliza remembered at last. Claudia kissed it gently, holding it close to her heart, a silent vow to honor their story and preserve their memory. Miss Marple glanced at Inspector Harrow. The police will handle Jonathan now, but our work here is done. Justice has been set in motion, and the lives affected by the past can finally begin to breathe without fear. Harrow nodded, a hint of exhaustion in his face, but also relief. You've done more than uncover a mystery, Miss Marple. You've restored balance to a household steeped in decades of deceit. The sound of the rain outside had stopped completely, leaving only the distant caw of a crow and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind as if the world itself acknowledged the end of a long, dark chapter. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the chest one final time, then lifted to gaze at Jonathan Harwood being escorted away. "The mask is off," she whispered, "and all the shadows have been illuminated. The truth, though painful, now stands unbroken." Claudia and Ramsay followed her gaze, a quiet understanding settling over them. They had survived the night, uncovered the lies, faced the murderer, and most importantly, discovered the complete story of Edwin and Eliza: love, tragedy, deceit, and finally truth. Miss Marple straightened, her cane tapping lightly against the polished floor as she whispered to herself, more for the house than anyone else: "Secrets may live for decades, but truth is patient and it always finds its way home." The manor was silent now, but the silence was no longer threatening. It was a quiet relief, the calm after a storm, a pause that allowed healing and reckoning to begin. The family, scarred but not destroyed, stood together, the past unmasked, the secrets revealed, and the night of shadows replaced by the promise of dawn. And with that, Greyminster Court, heavy with history and haunted by memory, finally exhaled, holding the story of love, loss, betrayal, and justice, safe in the knowledge that the truth had finally triumphed.